Hi everyone, it's Lisa Mears, and as promised during my Scrapbook.com SBC Fest video, I'm going to be sharing with you more ways to use nesting dies to make shaker cards. I'll be making 6 shaker cards in this video, and if you missed my video during Scrapbook.com's SBC Fest, I'll link it at the top right corner of this video and in the description box so you can check out some other fun shaker cards that I made using nesting dies. In this video, I'll be using basic shapes such as rectangles, squares, hexagons, and hearts. I'll also be using some not so basic shapes such as flowers, balloons, and even Christmas trees to make shaker cards. I'm going to show you how to make shaped shaker cards like this flower-shaped shaker card and this heart-shaped shaker card, and I'll also show you how to combine basic shapes such as squares and rectangles to form a grid shaker card like this. And finally, you'll learn how to create a shaker card window in front of a card panel like this balloon shaker card. So first, let's take a look at what nesting dies are and which ones I'll be using for my cards. Nesting dies are a set of dies that come in the same shape, with each one being slightly smaller than the other. They are typically used for layering your cardstock on your cards, but you can also create frames with nesting dies and even make shaker cards, which is what I'm going to elaborate on today. So I have the Spellbinders Precision A2 layering dies, the Scrapbook.com Hexagon nesting dies, the Hero Arts Infinity Squares, and the Scrapbook.com Nested Scallop Hearts. Nesting dies also come in a variety of fun shapes just like the ones you see here. I have the Scrapbook.com Nested Spring Flower dies. I also have the Scrapbook.com Nested Fir Tree dies and the Paper Rose Nested Balloons, all of which I'm going to be working with today. And if you're interested in any of these dies or any of the products that I use in my video today, check the description box of this YouTube video for links to all of my products, as well as on my blog at lisamearsdesigns.com. So the first set of dies that I'm going to use are the Scrapbook.com Nested Spring Flowers. I'm going to show you how to make a shaker card shaped like a flower. I'm going to be using the Scrapbook.com Sherbet Pattern Paper Pad, and I'm going to take a piece of this orange pattern paper as well as this floral print. I think those look so pretty together. And I'm also going to be using the Sherbet Smooth cardstock. This is solid color cardstock that matches the pattern paper pad. So I'm going to take out this bright orange, and these are the 3 pieces that I'm going to be using. I'm going to die cut the largest flower from the orange plaid paper, and then I'm going to use the second largest flower and third largest flower die together to die cut this orange solid cardstock. And I'm just going to layer the third largest flower inside of the second largest flower. I'm going to hold those together with some Scrapbook.com mint tape and then run that through my die cutting machine. And what that does is it creates a frame, and inside the frame will be all of the shaker pieces. And then I'm going to take those same 2 dies, leave the mint tape on them, and die cut another piece of cardstock. This time I'm die cutting white cardstock, and I'm actually going to be die cutting 4 pieces of white cardstock to get 4 white frames. So I'm going to show you how to stack up these frames to hold the shaker pieces inside. And using cardstock instead of foam for your shaker will give your shaker a more of a clean look. In addition, if your shaker pieces are thicker, then using cardstock is sometimes a better choice because you can add as many layers of cardstock as you would need to build up the walls of your shaker. So after die cutting those 4 pieces of white cardstock, I'm going to take those dies apart and use the larger one, which again is the second largest flower die cut a piece of the floral pattern paper as well as a piece of acetate. So let's take a look again at all of the die cut pieces. I have the largest die that I die cut the orange plaid paper. The second largest die was used to die cut this floral print as well as a piece of acetate. And then the second largest die layered with the third largest die was used to die cut 4 pieces of white cardstock as well as 1 piece of the orange solid cardstock. Next, I'm going to take one of the white flower frames, put glue on the back, and add it to the floral die cut piece. And then I'm going to take the remaining white frames and put glue on those and stack them one on top of another on top of the same floral piece. Next, I'm going to put glue on the back of the orange flower frame and add it to the piece of acetate. I'll set that aside, and next I'm going to take the piece with the floral cardstock and the white frame, and I'm going to put glue on the back of that and add it to the large flower die cut piece, which was cut with the orange plaid pattern paper. Now I'm ready to put my shaker pieces inside. So I'm using the sequins from 28 Lilac Lane. These are the Think Pink sequins, and I'm just placing them in the center of the flower inside of all of those stacked cardstock layers. Now, if you happen to use shaker pieces that are thicker than the walls of the shaker, then now is the time that you would want to add more white layers. So I'm good with the 4 cardstock layers that I glued together. So now I'm going to add glue to the top, so all along that white edge, and then I'm going to add my acetate piece right on top. Now this die also came with these circle dies for the center of the flower. So I die cut the larger circle out of the same orange cardstock as the frame, and then the smaller circle out of some pink cardstock, all from that Sherbert Solid pattern paper pad. I inked up the sentiment Happy Birthday. That is from the Cheerful Sentiments from scrapbook.com. I used this confetti pink ink, and I'm adding it to the front of the flower. And finally, I have to make the card base. So I'm taking a piece of white cardstock and folding it in half. And I'm going to take the largest flower die in the set, and I'm going to place the edge of the die over the fold in the cardstock. And I just want to make sure that I line the die up correctly on the cardstock. So I'm just placing my flower over top of the die just for placement, because when I add this to the card base, I want to make sure that it's straight. So once I have it exactly where I need it, I go ahead and add some mint tape to the die to hold it on the cardstock. I run that through my die cutting machine, and that's going to give me the card base. And all I need to do now is glue the flower onto the card base. But if I turn this over, I want you to notice that the top of the flower, the top of the petals, you can actually see the pattern paper behind it. If you want to get a clean white look from the back, all you have to do is take that same die cut a piece of white cardstock, glue the white cardstock onto your decorated flower, and then glue that piece onto the card base. Now when you turn this card over, you can see that it is completely white. You don't have any of that pattern paper on the back. So that is how you make a flower-shaped shaker card. For my next shaker card, I'm going to be using the scrapbook.com nested fir tree dies. There are 4 dies in this set, and for my card today, I'm going to be using the second and the third largest dies. You can also use the largest die to make a small mini album. You can use some of the smaller dies to make Christmas trees on your cards or on your scrapbook pages. I took the second largest die and die cut a piece of the pattern paper from the peppermint paper pad from scrapbook.com. I placed the Christmas tree die cut piece in my MISTI and lined up the stamp. I am going to be doing some embossing, so I first put some powder on that cardstock and added some Versamark ink to the stamp and stamped it down. I'll remove that from the MISTI and I will sprinkle some gold embossing powder over the top of my sentiment, and then I will heat set that. Next, I'll take the second largest and third largest tree dies. I will layer them together and I'm going to create a frame. I'm going to be using the Tim Holtz Metallic Classics. This is the gold cardstock, and I went ahead and die cut those. You can see it actually cuts the tree out of the inside. I also took that second largest die and die cut a piece of acetate because I need to have a cover for my shaker. So now I'm going to go ahead and put glue on the back of that frame that I die cut out, and then I'll add that to the acetate. Next, I'll flip that piece over and I'm going to add some foam to the back. So I'm using these foam strips from scrapbook.com, and I'm just going to add foam all along the back side of this framed tree in order to build up the walls for my shaker. Now, if you didn't want to use foam, you could also then take those two dies layered together and die cut as many pieces of plain cardstock that you would need to build up the walls for your shaker. But instead, I'm going to go ahead and use some foam. I want to also make sure that my foam is connected so that the shaker pieces don't fall out. So you see me putting some little pieces of foam in between. And because it's so close to that acetate window, I just turn it over just to make sure I can't see any of that foam overlapping into the acetate. So you can see me doubling up on the foam. So technically, if you didn't want to bother with all of this foam, you could just build up your walls of your shaker with some cardstock, and that might be easier for you. So here's a look at the back side of my Christmas tree, and now I'm ready to add my sequins. So I'm using the Spellbinders Gold Smooth Discs. And before I remove the backing off of my foam, I want to be sure that my sequins do not cover up my sentiment. So I want to make sure I have just enough sequins in my shaker so that when they fall to the bottom of the tree, they don't cover up the sentiment. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some powder to the acetate, because did you see how some of those sequins stuck to the acetate as I was just kind of playing with it? So adding powder to the acetate will help reduce that static cling. So now when I add the top cover on top of the sequins, you can see that there's absolutely no static. They are not sticking to the acetate. So there's my shaker. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the actual card together. This is going to be a 5x7 card. So I have a piece of that pattern paper that measures 4 5/8 by 6 5/8. I add that to a piece of white cardstock that's 4 3/4 by 6 3/4, and then I add that to the gold metallic cardstock that's 5x7 inches, and then I'll add my Christmas tree to the center. Now, before I started creating this shaker card, I had a different vision in mind, and I didn't think I was going to be using the same blue pattern paper on the actual card as I do in the Christmas tree. And if I were to do things differently, I could have just attached the frame of the Christmas tree shaker directly to the cardstock on the card, because you can see it has the same exact pattern. My initial vision was to use a different pattern paper on the actual card base. So I'm going to attach this layer to a 5x7 card base. And then the final thing I'm going to do, just to add some more sparkle to this card, is I'm going to take out my scrapbook.com Pops of Color. This is in the gold color, and I'm going to squeeze a little bit of the Pops of Color in between all of these snowflakes. For my next card, I'm going to be using a couple of different nesting dies. I have the Spellbinders A2 size nesting dies, as well as the Hero Arts Square Infinity dies. And I'm going to show you how you can actually take various size of nesting dies, so I have rectangles and squares, and combine them to create a grid. So you can see I have a large rectangle nesting die on the outside, and then I have another rectangle nesting die on the top and one on the inside bottom left, and then I took a square die and placed it in the bottom right. The paper that I'm going to be using is the Sherbet pattern paper pad and smooth cardstock from scrapbook.com. I'm going to use this paper with the pink hearts, and then I'm going to use the matching pink cardstock from the solids pad. I'm going to take my large rectangle die and die cut the pattern paper. I'm going to use some scrapbook.com mint tape to hold that in place because I want to make sure that my pattern paper remains straight and proportional. And then I'm going to take the same rectangle die and I'm going to reposition all of those rectangle and square dies inside. So basically just layering these together, and I'm going to die cut this out of the solid pink cardstock. So I want to make sure that my square dies are even. I have enough space there on the left and right sides of the die. I want to make sure everything looks nice and balanced, and I'm just going to add some of the tape to keep everything in place while I run that through my die cutting machine. So here's what my frame is going to look like when I run it through my die cutting machine. You've probably seen dies like this before where you actually pay money to have a die that actually has different frames cut out of it, but this will totally save you some money by using your nesting dies to do the same thing. So the pink frame die is going to be over top of the pattern paper, and they're both going to be the same exact size because remember they were both cut with the same exact large rectangle die. And you can decide if you want a landscape card, you can decide if you want a portrait card, you can decide if you want the large rectangle on the top or on the bottom or the left or right. So you basically, depending on what kind of card you're trying to create, you can position these rectangles any way you want. Next, I'm going to take that same large rectangle die and I'm going to die cut a piece of acetate, and the acetate is going to go underneath that frame. So I'm going to go ahead and put some glue on the back of the pink cardstock, and then I will add the acetate to the top. Next, I'm going to add some foam strips to the back of my pink frame. I basically need to cover up all of the pink on the back side of this frame. So I'm covering up all of the outside rectangle and then all of those inside cardstock lines, and making sure that my foam is connected on all sides so that my shaker bits don't fall out. Now that the frame part is ready to go, I'm ready to work on my stamps, and the stamp set that I'm going to be using is the Sunny Studio Stamps Passionate Penguins. And these penguins are so stinking cute. There's a couple penguins there underneath an umbrella. There's a couple of individual penguins. There's a cute set of penguins in a car and some popping out of an envelope. I go ahead and color all of these penguins up using my Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens. And for the body of the penguins, I'm just using 2 of my pens. I'm using the gray pen just right along where the actual body meets the face, and then I'm coming in with my blender just to blend that out. And these images are so small that you really don't need a lot of markers or pens to color them up with. And what I love about the Zig is that they are water-based pens, so that whatever color you put down, you saw that I put down a darker gray color, and just using the blender or even a water brush, it will blend that color out and you'll see a really pretty shading effect on those penguins. So again, it was just the one gray marker and then the blender pen. And if you don't have the blender pen, again, you can use a water brush or you can use a paintbrush dipped in water. For the nose as well as the feet, I use one marker, and that is the orange marker. I don't even need to come in and do any blending because the area is so tiny. And then I'm going to leave the bellies and the face white. I don't even need to worry about coloring that up because they're penguins and they're supposed to be white. So I move on and color the car, and for the car, again, I'm just using two colors. I'm using the turquoise green just to go along the outside edges, and then I'm going to use the blender marker just to blend that color towards the center so you can see the really pretty shading effect of that. I'm also going to be using the same gray marker and the blender for the front of that bumper and just blending it out there with the blender. And then I'm going to do the same gray color for the tires and blend those out. So not a whole lot of colors here on the car. I am going to come in with peach pink and just outline some of these small lines around the headlight, as well as those small lines around the front of the car, as well as I believe it's the steering wheel. I'm also going to color the bow and the penguin's hair with the peach pink and the blender. And then for the headlight, I am going to be using the lemon yellow. I'm going to put a little bit of the sugar almond pink on the cheeks just to give those penguins some rosy cheeks. And at this time, I'll go ahead and do that for all of my penguins. Next, I'm going to color the envelope, and I'm going to use the same peach pink color. I just outlined the lines on the envelope, and then I'm going to come in with the blender and blend that toward the center of each one of the triangles so you can see the nice shading effect going on there. And when I use the blender marker, or if you're using a water brush, always clean it off before going to the next color. So after I use the peach pink, I want to make sure that I clean the tip of that blender before moving on to this turquoise green color. Otherwise, if you still have that pink at the end of the marker and you go into the turquoise color, it's going to rub off on the green color. So you want to make sure that you have a clean tip. Okay, so once all of my images are colored, I went ahead and die cut them out, and now I'm ready to add my sequins for my shaker pieces. And I'm just adding the sequins to the pattern paper. I'm using the Buttons Galore Pink Flamingo as well as the Hero Arts Pink Pop Flowers. And I'm just making sure I have them in the right window frames. So once I add all of the sequins, I will be able to go ahead and add the pink frame right on top. I did add some powder to the acetate off camera, and now I'm just going to remove the adhesive backing from these foam strips, and then I'll add it to the top of the pattern paper. Next, I can go ahead and arrange all of my stamped images where I want them. And once I have them arranged, I'll go ahead and put glue on the back and add them to the front of the card. I stamped out one of the sentiments that says, "Waddle, I do without you," and I just trimmed it down, and I'm going to add it there at the top right hand corner. I just think this is such a cute card. I love all of those sequins showing up in the background, and all of those penguins are just too cute. So I'm going to go ahead and put glue on the back of this entire layer and add that to an A2 size card base. My card base measures 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. And that will complete this card. So I did have a penguin left over, so I'm going to use it on this next card. And for this card, I'm going to be using the scalloped heart nesting dies from scrapbook.com, as well as the sherbet pattern paper pad. So it's the same one I used in the previous card. I took the largest heart die and I die cut a piece of the pattern paper, and then I'm going to take the largest and second largest dies, and I'm going to layer them together and die cut a piece of this teal cardstock from the sherbet solid cardstock. So I'm going to make sure I add some mint tape to hold these dies together so they don't shift when I run them through my die cut machine, and that's going to give me this scallop frame, and that's going to fit perfectly over top of that pattern paper piece that I die cut out. So I took the large die again and I die cut a piece of acetate. So that large die is cut out of the pattern paper, the acetate, and then that one grouped with the next size down gives me the frame. And then I also have this third largest die, and I die cut this orange plaid pattern paper. Next, I'm going to add glue to the back of my teal frame, and I'm going to add it to my acetate. And because they were cut with the same die, it's going to fit perfectly over top. I'm going to add some foam to the back of the acetate heart, making sure that there are no gaps between that foam. Now, if you wanted to stack up your cardstock layers, you could totally do that, but I'm using foam here. I'm going to add the smaller orange heart inside of the pink and white heart. I'm going to add some sequins to the center, and then I'll add the frame with the acetate right to the top. And there's my heart shaker. Now again, you can do this with any dies you have. I'm just showing you how you can actually use shaped dies to make your shakers. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this into a card. I'm going to put my stamped image on there first. So I'm going to add the little penguins. And I'm going to add a sentiment to the bottom. So I just stamped out a sentiment that says, "I love you." And I'm just going to add it there right underneath the penguins in the envelope. And then I'm going to take a piece of cardstock, fold it in half. I'm going to take the largest die, the largest heart die, and just put it slightly over the edge of the cardstock where the fold is, die cut it, and then I have my card base. So now I can attach the shaker portion to the card base, but when I flip this over, take a look and you can see the pattern paper showing through at the back. If you don't like that look, just die cut that same heart die out of some white cardstock, glue it on to the back of the heart, and then attach it to the card base. And then you won't have that pattern paper showing in the background, and you have a nice clean look. And that will complete this heart shaker. So moving on, we're going to use the nested hexagon dies from scrapbook.com. There are 14 hexagon dies in this set. I'm going to use the 6th and 8th largest hexagon dies, and I'm also going to take a piece of this orange cardstock from the Sherbet Solid paper pad from scrapbook.com, and then I'm going to layer those 2 hexagon dies together, attach them with some mint tape so they stay and don't move when I run them through my die cut machine, and that's going to give me an orange frame. Next, I'm going to keep the mint tape on those dies, and I'm going to die cut 6 pieces of white cardstock to create 6 hexagon frames. And then I'm going to remove the mint tape and use the larger hexagon die and die cut a piece of white cardstock. And because I'm not using pattern paper, I wanted to have something fun on the background here. So I'm going to stencil up this hexagon, and I'm using a stencil from Picket Fence Studios. This is the honeycomb stencil, and I just added the cardstock to my Sizzix stamp and stencil tool, and the cardstock is stuck to the grid because it is a sticky grid, and then I just added the stencil on top, and I did put some pixie spray over the part where it's going to hit the cardstock so that it sticks. I'm just inking it up with some distress ink. I'm inking up the scattered straw and the wild honey, so the lighter ink at the top and then the darker ink at the bottom, just to create a little bit of a gradient. And when I'm finished, I'll go ahead and remove the stencil and remove the cardstock from the grid. And next I'm going to stamp out some images. So I have a piece of cardstock that measures 4 3/4 by 6 3/4. And I'm using this stamp set from Pink and Maine. It's called Ladybug Garden. I'm going to position these flower stamps at the bottom of my cardstock and stamp it down with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I am using the Bristol Smooth cardstock to stamp this on because I am going to be doing some watercoloring as well as some ink blending on this cardstock. So I'm going to take the other stamp and put it right next to the first one and ink that up and press it down. After the flowers are stamped down, I'll go ahead and remove that cover plate, and then I'm going to ink up the background. This is going to be the sky for my scene, and I'm using the Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink, and I'm just applying it all over the white area of the background. And then I'm going to be coming in darker towards the top and then lighter as I get down towards the flowers. So it's almost like that ink is going to blend into the white. I don't need to ink up the middle because the hexagon shape is going to go right over top of that middle. The stamps that I'm going to use are the Pink and Main Sweeter Than Honey stamp set. And I went ahead and stamped all my images out, and I'm going to color them up. For the beehive, I'm coloring with my brown marker along the bottom of the lines on the beehive, and then I come in with the yellow, and then finally the blender to blend towards the top of each one of those rows on that beehive. And for the line around the door, I think that is the Sugar Almond Pink that I'm using, and then I'm going to use the same yellow color for the bumblebees. For the branch, I'm coloring with brown and the blender, so only 2 colors on that one. I'm also going to be coloring the leaves with light green. Some of these images are so super small that you really don't need too many colors. You can just use the one color with your blender to get a good shade. Okay, so here is the larger bee that I'm using. I love this little bee because it's so cute. It's sitting on top of this flower, and I'm actually going to stick this inside of all of the flowers in the garden that I stamped out. And I'm using the peach pink and the blender for the petals, and then for the center I colored that with yellow. There are a few small clouds in this stamp set, which I colored up with some of the light blue and the blender. I'm adding some white gel pen to my stamped images, and next I'm going to color up my flowers. So I will have a list of all the colors that I use for all of the stamps and all of the inks for the backgrounds. I'll have all of that down in the description box below, and it'll also be on my blog. So if you wanted to duplicate any of this, you can go look at that and see what colors I've used. So while I color up these flowers, I just want to mention that in case you did not see my scrapbook.com SBC Fest video that aired on September 17th. Make sure you go back and check that out. That is on the scrapbook.com YouTube channel, and I will put a link in the description box of this video. But that video was all about nesting dies and shaker cards as well. And I did use some basic shapes to make shaker dies, as well as some not so basic shapes. So make sure you go check that out. If you like shaker cards and you want to learn more, you might enjoy that video. And I will also link it here in the top right hand corner of this video. Since a lot of the coloring on these flowers is redundant, I'm going to go ahead and skip over some of the coloring and finish up this card. So now that the card background is finished, we need to put the shaker together. So I'm just showing you the dies that I've used to die cut all of these hexagons. I've used the 8th largest die for the honeycomb background and the acetate, and then the 8th largest die with the 6th largest die coupled together to die cut those 6 white hexagons and an orange frame. So I'm going to go ahead and glue down all of these white frames to the stenciled hexagon. So I'm just putting glue on the back and adding one on top of another until all white 6 frames are attached. For the shaker pieces, I'm going to be using the Sprinklettes Bumblebees, as well as these Sunshine Sequins from 28 Lilac Lane. I'm going to go ahead and add some of these shaker pieces to the center of my hexagon. And look just how cute these little bumblebee shaker pieces are. They're also mixed in with some black circles and yellow sprinkles. So this is how I check to see if I have enough cardstock layers built up to form the walls of my shaker. Is I just put those shaker pieces right up against the wall of my shaker, and I just see if the cardstock is higher than the shaker pieces. If it's not, then I know I need to add more cardstock layers. But mine was perfectly fine, so I'm going to continue to add more of my shaker pieces inside of the hexagon. So if you need to add more cardstock pieces, this is the time when you need to do it by cutting out more white hexagons and gluing them to the top. I am going to go ahead and add glue to the top of my white hexagons, and then I'm going to add the acetate piece directly to the top. And then I'll add the orange hexagon frame to the top of that. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add my stamped images to the top of the hexagon. So I went ahead and positioned everything where I want it to go, and then I'll just glue them down. I'm going to go ahead and stamp out a sentiment, so I'm going to put this layer inside of my Sizzix stamp and stencil tool and position my sentiment onto the cardstock. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp it out with some black ink. My sentiment says Happy Bee Day. I'm going to go ahead and add the hexagon onto that cardstock panel. And I'm going to pop up this other bumblebee, putting some foam on the back of it so that it looks like it's in front of all of these other really pretty flowers in the garden. Look how cute that turned out. Oh my gosh, I am just in love with this card. I go ahead and add this panel to a piece of orange cardstock. So the orange cardstock is cut to 4 7/8 by 6 7/8, and then remember that panel that's decorated, it's 4 3/4 by 6 3/4, and then that's going to be added to a 5 by 7 card base. I'm going to add some of the Sunny Studio Stamps Clear Drop Mix to the front of the card. I'll go ahead and glue all of these down once I have them positioned where I want them, and that will complete this card. So moving on, I am going to be using the Paper Rose nesting balloon dies. This comes with a set of 7 balloons, even a really tiny one. And I'm going to be using the largest balloon from that set, as well as the scrapbook.com party stencil. So I have a piece of cardstock that measures 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm going to go ahead and stencil this confetti all over the background. This is a layering stencil, so I'm going to ink it up with the first set of colors on the first stencil, and then I'm going to remove it, and then I will ink up the second stencil until the entire background is layered in different color confetti pieces. Now the card that I'm going to be creating is going to be a shaker card, but it's going to be cut out of the front of the card with a piece of acetate looking into the inside of the card, which is going to be really fun. So once my stencil is complete, I'm going to layer that on a piece of pink cardstock from the scrapbook.com Rainbow Solid Paper Pad. The pink cardstock measures 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And then I'm going to take the largest balloon die and layer it on top of this cardstock layer. Just kind of center it on the front of that panel. I'm going to hold it down with some scrapbook.com mint tape, and then I'm going to run that through my die cut machine. And that will actually cut through both of those layers. And if you did not have this set of dies, you can do this with any dies. It could be with a rectangle, a circle, any of your nesting dies. So now I have an A2 size card base. And I need to cut through the front of the card base, so I'm just going to layer on the confetti cardstock layer, and then I'm going to put the balloon die right in the middle and then just tape it down. And then I'll run that through my die cut machine with the card base open, just like you see it there on the table. So when that comes out of the die cut machine, I'll go ahead and remove that tape. I will also remove the die, and I'll remove the top layer of the confetti background. And then I'm going to turn over the confetti layer, and I'm going to put glue on the back of that because I need to attach acetate to it. So I cut 2 pieces of acetate. They're both 4 3/8 by 5 3/8. I'm going to put one of the pieces right over top of this glue on the back of that confetti panel. And then I'm going to take some foam tape and I'm going to cover the back side of this confetti panel with some foam tape. I'm first going to go along the edge of the balloon because I want to contain all of my shaker pieces within the balloon shape. And then I'm going to take my foam tape and I'm going to outline the edge of that card layer so it's kind of like in a rectangular shape. And then all of the little gaps in the pink area there, I'm just going to put some more foam just so that I can have a sturdy background when I add this to my card front. I'll go ahead and add some sequins to the center of the balloon. I'm adding the Hero Arts pink pop flowers and some sequins also from my stash. I'll remove the backing from all of that foam. And then I'm going to take the second piece of acetate and add it directly to the top. I had a few pieces of sequins that shifted up onto the foam tape, so I just have to reach in there and fix that and then just press the acetate down to secure that on the back of this panel. Next, I'm going to work on the inside of my card. So I have another piece of the pink cardstock and the white cardstock, which I'm going to layer the white on top of the pink. So this is going to be for the inside. So when you open the card, this is what you'll see, and you'll actually be seeing it through the balloon on the front of the card. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to rest this balloon opening over top of my panel. And I'm just taping the die in place where the balloon is going to show, and I'm trying to decide what stamp will fit inside of this balloon. So it's important that I had that balloon die on top of this card panel so I can see exactly how to center up my stamp, because that's what's going to show through the front of the card. The stamp set that I'm using is the Happy Birthday stamp set from scrapbook.com. It is a solid stamp, so I'm inking up a few times with my black ink so I get a really good impression. And now all I need to do is add these layers to my card base. So the layer that has the sentiment on it is going on the inside of the card, and then the balloon layer will be glued to the front of the card. So I'm going to put glue on the back of the card layer, just where the pink cardstock is. You don't want to put glue, obviously, on the inside of the balloon because that's what's going to show on the front of the card. You don't want glue on that. So after you add glue to the pink area, just add it to the front of the A2 size card base, line it up with the balloon that is already cut out of the front flap of that card. Then just press that down really well, and then that is how you make a shaker card with a window in the front. I'm going to finish this up by just adding a bow to the bottom of the balloon with a piece of twine and a glue dot. And again, you can do this concept with any nesting die that you have. So I would love to hear which card is your favorite. Leave me a comment down below. And if you like this video, click that thumbs up button. And if you like videos like this, be sure to click that subscribe button and turn on your bell notification so that you get notified every time I release a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.